Hi everybody, my name is Rein. I'm here today to talk to you about virtual reality. It's so nice to see so many people showing up. I kind of suspected that early in the summer, maybe not such a crowded audience, but here you all are, so congratulations. So I will be talking about virtual reality and how I think it makes the world a better and more interesting place, and why I wouldn't want to work with anything else right now. And also kind of mix it up with the theme of the Creative Mornings, the end. So this new technology might also be an end of something, but of course every end is the beginning, and so that's a good thing. So I used to be a film director. Never made a feature-length film, but short films, and I worked in commercials, I think, for 6 years. But in 2016, I co-founded this company called VR Productions, and in a very short time, we became the most productive virtual reality content company in Estonia. We have made more than 20 VR projects, which is quite a lot, given how new VR actually is. And the stuff that we do is like 3D graphics experiences, 360 degrees videos, interactive experience, and so forth. But there's this famous saying that talking about virtual reality is like dancing about architecture. So can I get a quick show of hands? How many people have actually had a VR headset on their head and have tried VR? Almost everybody. Most people. Okay, that's great. Great audience. But to give a quick rundown, to get everybody on the same page, I will really quickly tell you why VR matters right now in 2019, why people are talking about it. So this is like a very short history of new wave of VR. It all started when in 2010, a guy called Palmer Luckey made a virtual reality headset out of old smartphone parts and stuff like this in his parents' garage. He founded a company called Oculus, and a few years later, Facebook bought that company for $2 billion. It was later revealed to be $3 billion. And now we have VR as this global industry, also called the next logical step in supercomputing. Its projected revenue is in billions, and all the technological giants like Samsung, Sony, Microsoft, Google, maybe Apple, there's a lot of rumors, are joining the fray, and they have made their own VR headsets, and they try to get their piece of the pie, and the technology is advancing really quickly. Just this year, there's at least 5 major headsets being not only revealed or announced, but actually going into the retail just this year. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the tech, but it's not such a nice thing going on in the content world. It's this weird situation where the tech is advancing really quickly, and it's actually really good, but there isn't enough good content to see on this tech, to watch it, and people kind of haven't figured out the good uses for VR yet. And also the content makers are kind of afraid of VR, and they are approaching it very cautiously, and it's kind of understandable because virtual reality is this new tech. To learn the rules and the tools to make this kind of new types of content, you need to invest a lot of time and thought into it. And a lot of creatives that I've talked to over the years are kind of having this approach that, VR is this nice new thing, but it can just disappear next year, and then all the time that I invested into getting into it might be wasted. And also the tools to create this content are also a little bit different if you come from like video production or video game development or photography or whatever more traditional field. Then the VR can be a little bit intimidating, because if you make a low quality product, this means that people won't always only say that they don't like it, they might actually get physically sick. So that's something that creators don't want to see, that somebody looks at something that you put hard work into and they're going to throw up. So yeah, that's not nice. And also VR is not in everybody's home. The consumers, the numbers are not there yet, so that means a very small install base, and that means not a lot of money going into the content, because it's not a logical investment, because it doesn't come back as money or you don't reach the audiences that you need to reach. And then again, VR is kind of being seen as this one-time gimmick. So you try it once, it's nice, but then you put the headset away and never use it again. So there's often this kind of a mindset that it might not have a future. And this all reminds me of something. It reminds me of the invention of film 124 years ago. Because when the Lumière brothers from France invented the film camera and the way to project it, it wasn't being seen as this great new thing. It was more like market fair entertainment. You would go to a fair, pay money for a ticket, go to a tent, watch a 10-second film. That's it. So, and the first short films were also kind of gimmicky. One of the first films was The Execution of Mary, the Queen of Scots, in 1895. It was a 10-second film with the world's first editing trick. So the actress who played the Mary, Queen of Scots, walks up to the executioner's stand. She gets down on her knees, puts her head on the stump, and then there's an edit, and she gets replaced with a mannequin. And then the executioner drops the axe and chops off the head of the mannequin, and people who watched it were horrified because they thought they just watched the person die. They thought that this young actress sacrificed her life for this 10-second film. And the other famous story is the arrival of the train to the station of La Ciotat. And the famous story is that when the train came towards the camera, that people actually ran out of the theater thinking that the train is going to come out and hit them and kill them. Which the story might be a little exaggerated, but this gives you a pretty clear idea that the first films were not very high artistic projects. They were more like one-time entertainment. And the Lumière brothers actually didn't see any future of this technology. They moved on to other projects. They didn't even want to license out the technology of the video camera and the projection. They thought that it has no future, and you know that these short films, that was it, and it doesn't deserve any more attention. They were wrong. Fast forward 124 years, and not only is the cinema still like one of the most impactful ways of storytelling, the invention of the technology of the moving image is something that has been very crucial to the technical development of humans as a race. Everybody has a TV. Well, not anymore, of course, but people get their news, their weather information from TV. If there wouldn't be video, we wouldn't have YouTube or Skype or Snapchat or whatever. And the Lumière brothers could have never imagined that. It would have been impossible, because our brain is kind of programmed in a way that we're pretty good at taking pieces that we have and putting them together, but it's very hard to put together a puzzle and kind of figure out, imagine the pieces at the same time. So that's how I want to approach VR, as something that can lead to something we can't even imagine yet. So this new technology we kind of tend to take old things and put them into new technology, but it might actually lead to something that we are just not able to imagine in 2019. So that's why I think it's exciting. But why VR? Why is it so special? What makes it different from other kind of technologies? The thing is that the world around us is digital anyways. We already take it for granted. Everything around us is digital. You go to a house, you can assume that some sort of a blueprint or 3D model already exists of that house. You see a car on the street and you know that it was designed inside a computer, so it has to be digital. Every person, our social relations, everything already exists digitally. But how do we get that digital information is always the same way, through a small or a big rectangular screen. And that's not the way that our brain kind of gets information from the real world. So VR, I kind of see it as a technology that makes this digital information more approachable, more natural for our sensory system, for our eyes and ear and our sense of balance and presence inside a real world. And well, the first logical step for that would be visualizing space, because there's a tremendous difference if you watch, for example, a blueprint of a building versus actually seeing it in 3D. But when you see it in 3D from a screen, you still have to work. You have to work your brain to imagine it, to move around it and try to imagine the scale. But in VR, it becomes natural, because if you're inside it in VR, you move around like you would in a real world. You see it stereoscopically. Suddenly, you get the sense of presence and you get the sense of scale. And it's all kind of automatic for your brain, so the processing power of your brain gets to be used elsewhere. So you can go a few steps further. VR can only also detect your motions in digital space and record them. That's what a lot of video games use. You use controllers and you don't just press buttons like you would on a controller or a keyboard. You actually use your body, your motion, your hands. You wave around, you squat, you kneel down, and VR headset can see that. It can see where you're going. And when you play a multiplayer game, that means that this gets transmitted through the internet and translated for this digital world. So I'm gonna show you a small video, filmed vertically. I don't know how well you can see it, but it's Mark Zuckerberg playing virtual tennis with somebody else. And you might ask a very obvious question: why aren't they playing real tennis? But then you would kind of be missing the point, because they're doing it completely virtually, just using the Oculus Quest headset, so there's no wires, there's no computers connected to it, it's just a headset and the two controllers. And while they're doing it in the same room, they could be anywhere in the world. They could be on the other sides of the planet, or I don't know, even on the moon, I guess, if they had good internet connection on the moon. But it means that the motions, the actual physical motions that they do get translated through the internet, and they can play tennis together, but they could be doing anything that you need, your physical body, your motions. You can use VR to train somebody to use complex machinery inside a virtual space. You can have a very realistic Skype call. Okay, not a Skype call, but to have some very intimate, like a call when you're out away and not close to your loved ones. So it could be used as a great communications tool, and also kind of a device to record your motions for the history, to analyze them 100 years later. So this is completely new. This hasn't been done on that level, on that accuracy before. So it creates tremendous opportunities. It might be the end of logistics. I mean, think how many car rides or how many plane rides could be replaced by a VR call, how much time you could save sitting in the airport. And the next logical step would be social interactions, because people want to do things together while not using a lot of time for transportations or logistics, and play games together, socialize together. The moving image you see below is actually 3D captures of people's reactions. So this is not filmed footage, this is actual 3D transmitted reactions. So our avatars in the future might be very realistic and very expressive. But all the things that I've talked about are kind of still using the technologies that we already have and just putting them into VR and assuming that they're a little bit better and a little bit more accurate. And I still feel like VR hasn't reached its potential yet. Like there's this very good use case that we kind of haven't figured out yet. That's not to say that we haven't already done, not us like me, but humankind hasn't found awesome uses for VR. For example, NASA uses it for training. This is like a low gravity training situation where the person is hanging from a harness which imitates low gravity scenarios and kind of makes them getting used to it. And they're using 3D printed tool which have a controller attached to them. So it's being tracked in digital space. So it's a funny situation where at the same time what you can see on the image is that it takes place in this huge NASA hangar with amazing technology. Also the harness system is like this huge system of pulleys and levers, and then they're using this €600 headset that you can buy from store and the 3D printed drill. So it's this great mixture of very specific technology and also technology that's pretty much available for everybody. And the new movie Lion King, the 2019 version, which just made it to the cinemas, was filmed in VR. Here you can see the director, the cinematographers, the animators, the lighters, all getting together in VR, walking around these virtual sets, imagining shots, figuring out the camera moves, the placement of the actors, the animal actors, and how they move and how it all looks like before sending it to the post-processing, this very expensive huge renderings where every piece of fur is very exact. So they used VR as this great communications tool to create some creative piece of work. And I'm guessing that because they used that, they saved a lot of time, and everybody was communicating a little better, and they had a more spatial understanding of the shots. And also, they saved a lot of money because they wouldn't have to redo the shots because they come out of the post-processing and they're like, oh, yeah, I imagined it completely differently. Let's do it again. So it can be a great tool. And these are some of the things that VR is already being used for. But what if we used VR to approach something that our brains wouldn't be approaching otherwise? I don't know what that would be. I'm just throwing out the question. What if we used VR to familiarize ourselves with concepts that we can't imagine yet, or that are kind of like too abstract for us to feel or visualize? Like just a random idea. What if you work in a very big organization, like where like 10,000 or 1 million people working in that organization, and you feel like a small cog, and somehow we use VR to make you feel more part of the whole and more part of this huge organization, and kind of understand what all this energy and time that you're putting into your work, how it actually becomes something meaningful. Just an idea. Next time you try VR, try to imagine what kind of new things it can lead up to. So to wrap things up, here's a picture of father and the son using VR headsets while charging their Tesla. The future is here in a way. The technology is here, but I'm not sure if we have reached the full potential of the technology of VR yet. So it might lead to something that's super obvious when you think back of it, but you might think in a way that skips a few steps ahead and already reaches this logical step. So I think it's very interesting to think about. I think it might lead to the end of some technologies that already are here, and I think it's very exciting. Yeah, thank you for listening. And I think we have time for questions.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's working.
Hi, yeah, thanks for your talk. It was really interesting to hear, and I just want to ask your opinion. So, when technology advances and we can render really high quality scenes, VR becomes stable and, as you said, reaches its peak, do you think it's gonna replace conventional displays and monitors, or is it gonna be a completely different branch of technology?
I think in the near future, VR is going to be like its own specific technology. There are already some apps where, for example, you can go into VR, be in a virtual room, like also together with friends, and watch a virtual TV on the wall. So you can watch films together with people who are not in the same physical space as you. But I think replacing the actual screens for everything that we do daily is still very far off. It might be, one of the theories is that you might eventually get some sort of lenses which function as both like the AR and VR glasses. So you have this AR layer on top of the world around you, and then you can just kind of shut off everything around you and just be in a bubble and watch a movie or play a game, kind of like the headphones for your eyes. So you wouldn't need a screen then, because everything might be a screen. You can just conjure up a screen as big as you want everywhere, so you don't need to have an actual screen on your desk or wall or whatever. But I think that's still very far away.
Yeah, cool. Let's hope we get there. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. Is there anything like an ethics movement for VR or ethics commission? I'm drawing an analogy with AI, which is also quite far away. I mean, like real AI, but there are already serious conversations about how will it impact our lives and what could be the, rules, how to behave with it. Is there something about VR currently, or is it too immature yet?
Well, there has been some discussions about ethics, but I don't think VR has so big problems as I think AI could potentially have, or at least maybe we can't imagine it yet. We don't know what problems it leads up to. There's, for example, one. It's not like an ethical question. It's more like a biological or a physical question. Is that should kids use VR? And some of the major headsets, for example, the Oculus, they have this limit, this recommended limit that under 13 you shouldn't use VR, or only like at your own risk. And then this year, Nintendo, one of the biggest toy companies in the world, released their VR sets for kids. So there isn't any kind of data that says that there is some kind of threats, but I think the thing that's most talked about with VR is isolation. That everybody lives alone in the future. There's kind of the traditional family model has ended, and people will just be in their small apartments, sitting inside VR, and that's this dystopian future. And I think that's why a lot of tech companies have a lot of effort, or they put a lot of pressure onto social applications, so that the official statement would be that VR is there to connect people. And I think it's very important that that these VR experiences help us connect others and meet new people and kind of experience new things together instead of just blocking us in. Although some things are very nice alone also. Yeah. I hope I answered your question.
What content impressed you the most in VR experience? I mean, like movie, game, or app? What's your favorite?
What's My favorite.
Yeah, something like, oh wow, it's super cool in VR, wow.
Well, I'm a bit of a gamer, but I think that VR games work best if you have to use your whole body. A year ago, a huge success was released called Beat Sabre. It was made by really few people, and it's this rhythm game where you use two lightsabers to chop these boxes that come at you in a rhythmical fashion. And it sounds really stupid, but it's the most awesome game ever, and it's really captivating. And you use your whole body and kind of go into music, and also it's this. I kind of feel like I'm living in the future when I say to somebody that my feet hurt because I was playing a video game yesterday. So I think that kind of the best games for VR right now are the ones that are really intense, because when you put on the headset, you don't want to wear it for like 6 hours at a time. You want to do something quickly, be really energized, use your whole body, and unfortunately, I see a lot of games which are just taking the old concepts and just jamming them into VR and hoping they work. Some of them work, but it's just a very boring approach. So yeah, the more physical, the more intense, the more I like it right now. I might change my view in a few years.
Hi, I'm also your soulmate. I like this Sabre. Probably I'm 1% or 0.001% who have VR at home. So,
Okay.
And my 25 years son, 25 years old son is just bought it for fitness, and 9 years old son playing also with a brother for fun. What do you think? What is the biggest obstacle for development, technological development? I mean, because I see the consumers and content, but what is the biggest? Consumers and content.
Well, there are a lot of technical issues and things that haven't been figured out yet. The cool thing about VR is that for VR you always need to be on this bleeding edge of technologies, because there are still like processing power and graphical power that you need. But I don't think it's the biggest hurdle. I think it's more about not knowing how to approach VR creatively, because there really isn't a tradition of a VR discipline. I mean, there are some schools, I guess, in the world where you can go and learn to become a VR expert or a VR designer, but I would say that in these very few years that we haven't still reached that level yet, and it will still be far off. I think we have a real shift in paradigms when these young kids who play VR right now, when they reach their creative age, and they kind of can't imagine a world without VR, because it has always been there for them, and it's like a part of their worldview. And when these kids reach maturity and start creating stuff, I think that's where we see the real push, because right now everything is so new, so people kind of just put things into VR and assume it gets better in VR. Mostly it doesn't.
Actually, I want to say stereotype. They're mature already. I'm working with the kids, and they're so creative. We must be mature to use them and give them this possibility. Actually, they're mature. They can't create now. Also 9 years old, 5 years old. Problem is that they have now this technology in schools, for instance.
Yeah, well, yeah, in schools, well, I think the best approach that schools, I have talked to a lot of like universities, high schools, and I think the best approach right now would be just make it available. You don't have to have like expert courses in VR or special workshops. Just make it available. Buy a headset and put it into the computer class so that people can try it and find out what it's all about. I mean, that's how a lot of us, I'm the 90s kids, I guess. That's how a lot of us got to know the computers, because you wanted to play a game. in the school's computer class. So you needed to figure out how to bypass all the security locks and how to install games on the computers. So, and that's kind of what drove the interest, and also what kind of drove the development also of graphical processors and whatnot. So games are a huge driver, and I think the best approach right now is just make it available. If people want to create, let them.
Yeah, hi. I'm very curious, how did you find out that you're interested in, like, how did you find out that you're interested in VR and these things? Like, you were a film director and then you just met a person maybe that encouraged you, or what happened?
Thanks for the question. Why is it making this noise?
They're too close.
Okay.
Can I turn it up?
My hand like this? Okay, so I used to be in video production and worked in commercials, and but at the same time I'm a video game enthusiast, and I used to be a video game journalist also, still am actually. But I went to this tech show in Finland, I think like 2013, and there I tried out VR for the first time, and I was blown away. Like, this is amazing. I'm on top of this high thing, and I can physically feel like I'm afraid of this height, and I know that I'm sitting on a chair. How can this be? So, and then actually like a half a year later, with the film school, I went to, again, Finland. Finland has a big part in my life, I guess. To this film festival / workshop, where there was an opportunity to participate in a VR workshop class. And they used different technologies to create 360 degrees videos. And that was a big revelation for me, because I thought I was a film guy, and suddenly I found that I can use my skill set to create VR, which I thought was directly only like a gaming thing. So I would need to be a game developer to create VR, but then I used my video skills to make VR, and that was a big revelation. And I kind of went further and further into that, and now I'm working with game developers. So yeah, I think it's just a perfect combination for me to be between the film world and the gaming world. So they kind of intersect, and for me, they always kind of move together. So it's just like a logical thing for me. Yeah, never looked back. Quit my job, went to VR.
Hello. What I want to know is, like you said, if the content is bad, if the content is bad, the VR content is bad,
yeah,
the users will feel sick or they throw up. So why actually have you identified if we do this thing, it will feel bad for the human body? Like, what are the don't do's in VR content making?
Yeah, so the question is, why might people throw up when they're watching bad content? There are like a number of best practices that you should use, which are pretty easy to find, but it's a lot to do with motion. Well, physically, how you feel balance and how you feel your body inside an actual space. It has two things working. One is your visual brain, your visual sense, and the other is your inner ear, because you have this, what's it called in English, the balancing organ, yeah, you know what I mean. And when those two things go into conflict, then evolutionary, it means that you're hallucinating, which means that you ate something poisonous, which means that you should throw up. So it's this evolutionary reaction of our body that if those two senses are conflicting, then you should throw up, because that's like your body's defense mechanism. And this needs to be taken into consideration when you're designing VR content, because, for example, the camera can't move around too fast, and there's a lot of small tricks. For example, there's this thing called the Cockpit Effect. So when you're inside VR and you would be hovering above ground at a very high speed, you would get sick. But if there was a virtual car around you, then you wouldn't get sick because you're kind of visually grounded into that car, and then the world going past you feels completely natural because in a car you also kind of sit there. And so there's a lot of these small effects. But also, in a few years, we have kind of discovered that not all of these rules are set in stone. For example, there's this great discussion about locomotion, how we should move around inside VR. Because the most safest thing would be teleportation. For example, you have the controller in hand, and then you click on some place on the ground, and then you just kind of magically teleport there. And that's this very safe way to move around in VR. But there's also the option that you just like hold down a button and you move in VR, which sounds terrible, but you get used to it like quite soon. So in every video game that's being announced for VR, like the first question that a lot of people have is it teleportation or is it free locomotion? And there's different school of thoughts because of that. But the thing is that it's one of these things where this knowledge base and this best practices and traditions are still kind of working out, and they're not. There are no hard rules about that. It's best to just test things out and see if people get sick or not. Yeah.
It works. Hi, thank you for your talk. I just have 2 questions. The first one, in which field you develop VR, like in movies, in games, or it's like something summarized? And the second one, have you thought about VR like a medicine for disabled people?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, so the first question was what kind of content I actually make? Okay. So my background is in film, and I'm more like a very technical-minded director. I used to work as an editor and animator. So I made like a lot of 360 degrees videos, and well, we still do. But at the same time, we work with a lot of game developers to create what is technically a game content. And well, actually, in video game development also there's a lot of overlap between those things. For example, you create the 3D space, and like right now we're using, for a few projects, we're using photogrammetry. So it's this technology where, for example, we take a drone and we fly above ground in some area, and then we take a lot of pictures from that drone, put it into a software, and we get 3D image out of that area, made out of these pictures, also with like real-time textures. So it's a good example of this kind of mix where 3D graphics and photography aren't really like two separate worlds. They're kind of blending together, and we're using these different skill sets. But yeah, I would say that if you're looking into the future and want to be inside VR in the future, then game engines are the way to go, like Unity or Unreal, this kind of softwares that have made it possible for pretty much everybody with a computer to make games, create game content inside these engines is really something that you should look at and learn these engines. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different kind of skill sets that are useful in all kind of creative arts, but in VR, game engines and 3D modeling and stuff like this, I think it's most of the future. I'm going to rant a little bit here, but in the future, the kind of technology that we don't have yet would be volumetric capture, which means that we would capture a 3D space in real time, like a video, not just make one image out of everything, but just this changing kind of frames, and then you would control everything inside it. You can change the light, you can change the geometry, you can add 3D people, trees, whatever, kind of manipulate the scene. So this would be excellent for VR because it would mean that you can actually walk around in a scene, see it from different angles, experience it differently. So volumetric capture is the kind of technology that I would be most excited about the future, but how we're going to capture that, I don't know yet. The second question was, medical field. There's a lot of uses for VR inside the medical field. Mostly about training, because VR is this good one step further from like some other kind of simulation. It's, for example, let's say CPR. There are a lot of startups in the world for VR CPR. Let's say you know how to do CPR on this mannequin, Annie, I think it's called. A lot of you have probably practiced it when you made your car license, right? So you take the mannequin, you do CPR on it, and then you do it the same thing with a VR headset. So you still do CPR on the physical mannequin, but around you, we can create a scene of the car crash. And the person lying on the ground is actually humanoid looking and bloody, and it's all like very chaotic. And this is like one step further from this very sterile and boring situation of just pumping the chest of the mannequin, and then it's something that actually prepares you for real life scenarios. So VR could be this logical one step further inside training situations, which are very high risk scenarios, also like in military training or what have you. But also in the medical field, there are different use cases. For example, just adding gamification elements to some very boring exercises that you need to do. For example, if you hurt your back and you need to do these very boring exercises every day, and then we add some level of interactivity in VR, and you get awards and achievements, and it gets more interesting for you. Or also helping people with pain while you're maybe in the future when you go to a dentist. You have a VR headset on and you see very nice images, and makes you forget about all the stuff going on in your mouth. So yeah, medicine is actually something that's being looked at very thoroughly for VR, because the training in medical field is very expensive, and it needs to be very thorough. So VR can really help that, but it can also help patients. It wouldn't be the best solution for recovery for example, people with neurological problems, because if your visual system, for example, is impaired when you've had a stroke or something, then VR would be a bit too intense. But for a lot of purposes, it could be a very good solution. I'm just kind of throwing out examples here, but also in the US, it's being used as a part of therapy for soldiers with PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD, okay, yeah, you know what I mean. So to kind of relieve some situations, but not in a completely realistic manner, in this kind of a stylized fashion, and it could be really useful for therapy to kind of relieve some light version of trauma. And yeah, there are tons of different examples. So medical field is definitely something that is being used by VR.
Okay, I think we have time for one or two questions.
How much time does it take to create any VR creation, and how many people are involved into the process?
How many people are involved and how long time it takes? Well, it's one of these hard questions that we constantly have to answer when somebody asks our company for a price quote. But the simple answer would be that, for example, if you make a 360 video, it's more time and resource intensive than making a regular video, obviously, because you have the process of stitching, and the whole post process is a little bit more difficult. But if I think about our projects, then even like small scale projects usually have at least like 10 to 15 creative people involved. Not always, but it really depends on the approach. If the approach is more like video production, or if the approach is more like a video game development, then you could compare it to these fields. But yeah, a few. And a few months is usually what we say to a project. But it really depends on the scale. I think if you, well, it's really different because the content we make is usually kind of like business to business. But if you want to make something for larger audiences, to make something, you know, if you want to make like a game that a lot of people will see, and you want to kind of break new ground with it, then you should take the extra time and really polish it and really test it on a lot of people and see if they get sick, if they get bored, if what happens with them, what kind of emotions it brings. So yeah, making a good thing always takes more time. That was a really vague answer, I'm sorry.
Okay, we have 3 more. We can ask now one question, and then if Rein, if you have some time, people maybe can come to you.
Sure.
Okay, let's do this. Okay.
Yeah, hi. I would still like you to be more specific. If I wanted to take part in this meeting in virtual reality,
yeah.
How much would it cost you to recreate this space?
This space?
Yes.
In here?
Yes. It's probably not the best use of this good technology, but just to make something really simple as this space, so I could be at home and take part.
Well, creating a 3D space isn't that difficult these days because usually you have blueprints for the house which you can use, or like an architectural 3D model or something like this. The most cheapest and easiest way would be like to make a 360 photo and then just use it as a backdrop in some social app, but that would be a bit cheating, I guess. Yeah, I'm looking around with the eyes of an artist. There's a lot of glass and reflections and like leaves outside, and these are tricky to make, but just creating a 3D environment, you know, a few weeks, I guess. But I think that when you have like social situations, and then you would have specific apps for that. There are a lot of like VR chat rooms, which already brought some very weird memes to the universe, and some different kind of social apps where you can actually change the environment. And so if somebody would come to us and say, create a social situation about this, I would just say like, use the apps that already do that. Because, you know, social things are hard. They take a lot of polish. So yeah, I'm not going to answer that question. Thanks for the question, though.
So we had 2 more questions, right? Here. I think if someone needs to leave because it's already 10, you can feel free. It's let's then do these 2 questions and finish.
Okay. You mentioned that Lion King was made partially in VR. I mean, the camera angles and shots.
Yeah.
I've seen some other clips of artists taking their creative process to VR. At the same time, you said also that the best use of VR is like quick and intense, but creative process usually is the opposite. Like it takes, people usually work behind their computers for longer hours.
Yeah.
So how close, what's the scenario? Like how for example, how much do you yourself work in VR when you're making stuff for VR? Like how much, I mean, do parts of your team 3D model in VR, or do you just make it for VR? I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good question. I want to specify when I said that I prefer my VR experience is quick and intense, then obviously working creatively inside VR for a long time is it's quite opposite. But it's kind of the difference of what's fun and what's necessary. When my approach usually is that I still use a lot of traditional tools behind a traditional screen. For example, when video editing at 360 video, then I still used Adobe editing software. Yay, Adobe is a sponsor here. Yay. But it actually has the VR support. So you can technically, you can edit with a VR headset on, or at least like playback with a VR headset. But since usually it's too resource intense to watch in high quality, then I kind of edit together, then put it into VR, then watch it, then write down the changes, then go back. I hope it's more smooth in the future. But there's a lot of situations where it is possible to model in VR and do stuff in VR, but sometimes it can be counterintuitive when you're working behind the regular screen and then watching it in VR, because well, when we first started out with making 360 videos, then they used to be monoscopic, which is made, you know, there's no depth, it's just one video bubble. And then we moved on to stereoscopic camera. Stereoscopy is the effect of like 3D cinema, when you go to a 3D cinema and put on the glasses so your eyes see different things, and this creates this illusion of depth. So the first time we used the stereoscopic camera, we got it just before the shoot, so we didn't have the opportunity to test it. And later, when I was editing together the stuff, then I discovered how wildly different it is when you have the effect of depth and when you're editing it and then you're watching it in VR, and how your eyes adjust to it and see it in a different level. And I realized that I made some mistakes. For example, when filming people, like I placed them too far away, and then the stereo effect didn't happen, and some far away objects became too small. So it's really important to feel this depth around you. And this is something that you can't do behind a regular screen. So I'm really can't wait for the future where I could do everything in VR and not just be like, often it's a very, very cumbersome process. Like, okay, so I'm rendering it now, then I put on the USB to my computer, then I load it to my headset, then I watch it, then I make the changes, so yeah.
So you think it's mainly just technology catching up with, but people would actually use it for it's healthy and everything to be in VR for a long time and work there?
Do I think that technology is catching up?
Yeah, like do you think it's the reason why people don't use it now? It's not because it's just mainly because of technology not being there yet.
Yeah, it definitely could be better. I mean, for example, this year there was a headset released in Finland, once again in Finland, called the Vario Headset, which is not designed for like a home user, which is like a 5,000 euro headset with a very high fidelity area in the middle. So it's like made specifically for designers, because some designers feel like the regular headsets are too low resolution and not accurate enough for them to use them in their actual work, but they want to use VR for the work. So it's this VR headset made specifically for designers, and it's used like in car factories and places like this. And there are some technological limitations why VR isn't perfect for everything yet, but I mean, we all know that technology gets better. The mobile chipsets get faster like every year, and the graphical processing gets better, and you know the technology is just a matter of time. But I think the question of actually designing these good tools, which are very intuitive and comfortable to use inside VR, is something that you know, the equal amount of of energy and investment should go into that also, and not just like creating a more high-resolution screens. So yeah, I'm really hoping for more comfortable, more high resolution, more high refresh rate, whatever, high fidelity headsets, because that's what brings the advancement of technology forward. But at the same time, where we are right now, we kind of get a glimpse. Why I say that for my personal use, I like fast and intense experiences that still just putting on the headset is, it's friction. In the user design, it's this term called friction. Is like, how much friction do you have to use something? If it's too inconvenient, then people won't use it in their everyday. If you put on a headset and you need to adjust it and you need to put on the cables and set up the sensors, it's still too much of a hassle. But if you make it really easy, really simple, really comfortable, then people will adopt this technology and make it part of their everyday life. And I mean, that's kind of the iPhone effect also of the smartphones. I mean, iPhone wasn't the first smartphone, but it was kind of designed well enough to take away the friction of using it. That was a long answer.
And the last one, do you know how much is VR used in Estonian schools? Are you maybe creating some content used by elementary or secondary schools, like in the learning process, I mean?
Mm-hmm. In the schools of Estonia, I have talked to some representatives of the schools, and it's, well, if it's kind of something that's not standard, then it's definitely not in every school. But you could really see, as an outsider of the educational system, that it depends on the administration and how progressive they are and how technically minded. Some schools really try to adopt this technology really far away. One school, at least I know that they have some sort of a VR lab, and they're actually like teaching kids to create stuff in VR. And well, every now and then we get an email from some school saying, we would like to buy one VR, please. And, how much it costs to have a course in VR or something like this, when it's or educational course in VR. And then we have to answer that we don't have like this standardized solution for you. If somebody would fund it, then we would love to bring it to all the schools. But the educational system, as a big system, is a very slow-moving machine, and it's very hard to make things mandatory and to actually enforce that. So it really depends on the schools right now. And one more thing, there needs to be this one activist. That's our experience. That the schools where there's this one very active teacher or administration member who wants VR and new technologies for the kids, if somebody like that is driving it, then things will happen. If everybody is like, yeah, meh, then nothing will happen. There are also some educational startups in Estonia about VR, so let's see how that goes.
Okay, it's time to wrap up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rein. We have we have a small present for you back with end. I think. Yeah, it's the end bag. Yes.
Thank you very much.
To remember about this talk, about this morning. And thank you for coming. I think it was very nice discussion, very active one. I even didn't have a chance to ask you questions because they all already asked everything, I think. And yes, dear friends, next month we are skipping. We will be on holidays. And I hope to see you in September. So follow us on Facebook and subscribe to newsletter. And yeah, see what's happened next. And if you are interested to help organize Creative Mornings, you can come to me or write to us because in August we'll be working on like new events and strategy to continue. Thank you. Have a nice day. Have a nice weekend. Have a nice summer. See you. Bye.